Hello everyone, welcome to the latest wave of ALVA public sentiment research. We've been running public sentiment work on behalf of ALVA throughout the pandemic, but we've now really migrated these into more ad hoc pieces of work, which are run on an as demand dictates basis. And this wave was set up in response to attractions really wanting to understand what's the summer outlook for visitor attractions this year, because clearly for many it's a crucial period. So why are we running this now? Well, the current challenge is really to understand the attraction sector as a whole has really yet to see visitor admissions return to pre-pandemic levels. So there's lots of published and anecdotal evidence from ALVA and indeed elsewhere that indicates that this is the case still. So we really want to try to understand what are the current barriers preventing the public from visiting attractions, and what are the prospects for visitor admissions during the summer period. So how do we generate the insights this time around? Well, it's broadly the same approach as for the work we've been doing during the pandemic for ALVA as well. So it's online research among representative sample of the UK adult public. And this work was done between the 6th and 10th of June this year, and it's among around about 1,000 members of the UK adult public. So let's jump straight in and look at the prospects for visiting attractions this summer and autumn. So one of the first questions we ask is, how often do you think that you will visit each of these types of attraction in the UK in the next few months? So by the next few months, we mean up until the end of October, so summer and autumn, and compare that with the same period last year. So do you think for each of these types of attraction, you will be visiting much more often, a little more often, about the same, a little less often, or much less often than you did at the same time last year in 2021? So I think the overall summary, as you can see from this really, is that across all attraction types, at least a third of audiences feel that they will visit more often than they did in summer or autumn 2021, which clearly bodes pretty well for visitor admissions over the next few months. So we can see here, yeah, around about a third or over a third think they will visit much more often or a little more often than last year, and really less than 15%, it varies a bit depending on the attraction type you look at, but less than 15% say that they will visit less often than they did last year. So the sector seems set for certainly an improved domestic visitor admissions in 2022 compared with 2021. However, there is this notable segment who feel that they will visit less often than last year. So yes, it's only sort of 15% or less, but it is still a reasonably significant segment, and I'll come back to that later on. So the most powerful question we tend to ask in this survey is this one here, and it's the one that really brings out the key triggers and barriers for visiting attractions. So it's, please tell us in your own words how you feel about visiting attractions in the UK at the moment and over the next 3 months or so. So at this question, people can say whatever they want to. So these are completely spontaneous answers. So I've been through these open questions and coded them all up into themes, and we can see the answers here. So I think we can see, first of all, that there is this kind of prevailing sense of happiness and relief among the public that we can return to normality. So lots of positives about visiting attractions over the next few months. So people saying, yeah, I'm fine about visiting them, I will enjoy them. And in particular, this 15% here who are specifically saying things about, I'm happy to get back to normal, I don't have any COVID worries anymore. So they're kind of feeling excited and looking forward to getting back to normality, which is really driving that increased propensity to want to visit attractions this year that we saw on the previous slide. Having said that, there are some kind of barriers still, and these are really at the roots of why lots of you are seeing that visits aren't back to where they were pre-pandemic, and it's these things on this left-hand side. So I think, again, the summary of that really is that whilst the rising cost of living is certainly emerging as a significant barrier to visiting attractions, so here we've got 16% spontaneously mentioning rising costs of living or being too expensive to visit attractions. I think it's really important to point out that there are still these lingering concerns around COVID, and they are equally likely to still be holding audiences back, and especially audiences, older audiences, as we can see down here. So you've got 15% who mention some sort of worry about COVID that will prevent them visiting this year. And we need to remember that at no point in the survey up to this point have we mentioned COVID at all. So this is all completely spontaneous comments about COVID still being a barrier. So that's 15%. You've got another 7% that say, yeah, I will visit, but I'm still concerned about COVID. And another 5% down here that say, I don't like crowds. So we can't completely attribute all of that to COVID, but I suspect some of it is as well. So I think at least a quarter are still mentioning some sort of concerns around COVID. Looking at that in a little bit more detail, so focusing on COVID, I'll come back to cost of living in a second. But these concerns around COVID still tend to relate to avoiding crowds and a feeling that the virus is still circulating, despite it really being less in the public eye. So these are the 15% that I mentioned about worries about COVID actually preventing visits. This top one's quite a good comment. I'll read it out. So I'm most likely not going to any attractions over the next few months. I would not want to go to any indoor attractions due to COVID/monkeypox, believe it or not. I'm going to wait a bit longer till either there is a better vax for long COVID. I don't want to catch anything that has a 20 to 30% sequela. I had to look that one up, means medical condition, that can last years, as I have enough going on with my health. Outdoor, probably for the same reason, I wouldn't go, although if I needed to do one or the other, it will be outdoors for safety. Again, because we've been left to allow COVID to run amok, I and most people I know will still not go to attractions, shop much, holiday due to COVID or monkeypox. So I think that kind of sums up the mood of this 15%. Someone down here saying, I've not visited any attractions and don't plan to in the near future because I'm still avoiding crowded places, or I'm still wary about undue exposure as the threat of COVID is still present, though not publicised so much. So, you know, at this point about not being in the public eye, and I am elderly and have several health conditions which makes me vulnerable. So just because it's dropped out of the news, it doesn't mean that you've still got a reasonable amount of people still worried about it to the extent that is preventing visits. And you've got a further 7% over here saying, as we saw on the previous slide, I will visit, but I still have this lingering concern about COVID. So I think potentially if there were another wave, and it looks like there potentially may be a wave or mini wave or whatever it turns out to be on the horizons, it might be that this 7% then swings back into being a non-visitor, preventing visits. So again, it's really summarized up by this comment here. So I love visiting attractions, but I'm still wary of crowds due to COVID. Sure, I'm vaccinated and it seems relatively mild now, but that doesn't mean I want to catch it. However, I am planning to visit a local zoo fairly soon, so that's mostly outdoors, and I've missed getting out to zoos and museums in these past 2 years. So these are really people who have overcome their fears because they really want to get back to visiting again. So I wanted to mention COVID because it's still an issue, although we all want to move on. Now, I mentioned earlier that clearly the rising cost of living has been mentioned now as an emerging barrier to visiting attractions, and you know that 16% spontaneously mentioned something about that. So let's dive a bit further into that. Firstly, I wanted to take a look outside this survey and have a look at the UK confidence barometer that's run by GfK, and that shows the public's outlook for their own personal financial situation over the next 12 months is at its lowest point for the past 15 years. And I think actually it goes back well before that, to be honest. So that's really the light blue line here. So that's people saying how the proportion of people saying, how do you expect the financial position of your household to change over the next 12 months? Will it get better or worse? And this light blue line, as I've said, is at its lowest point for a very long time. The blue line is the people who are saying, how has the financial situation of your household changed over the last 12 months? That's still low, but it's no lower than it was about 10 years ago. Where it is really much lower is the expectations around the next 12 months. So not only do people feel worse off than they did a year ago, they are expecting this to still get worse in the next 12 months. So at the moment, people are really kind of failing to see the light at the end of the financial tunnel. And then within our survey, we asked the question, how does your personal financial situation compare with about a year ago? And within our survey, actually over 40% feel worse off than they did a year ago. So similar to the GfK survey, compared with only 16% who felt that they are feeling better in terms of their personal financial situation than last year. So that 40%, I'm going to keep coming back to. That's 40% of the whole population feeling their personal financial situation is worse than a year ago. And who feels worse than a year ago? It's particularly affected those from the lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So among ABs, it's 33% feeling worse. Among DEs, it's 51%. And there is an increasing feeling worse as you get older among the population as well. So 32% among under 35s versus 47% among the over 55s. But I think what's striking is that it is affecting everyone. So although it is worse among those two groups, even a third of ABs are feeling worse off than they did a year ago. And that's really corroborated by, again, external research that YouGov have done. It's actually back in January 2022 now, but I thought it was worth showing this. And again, this looks at the proportion that think that their household's financial situation will be worse 12 months from now. Again, there is this age relationship getting higher, seems to be affecting all but the very youngest, who I guess have fewer commitments, many still living at home. But there is that age relationship. But again, it's not affecting the 25 to 49-year-olds. So it is affecting every age group. And as we saw from that earlier chart, we saw that there's this 16% who spontaneously mentioned something about the rising cost of living or being too expensive, as when we're asking them about how they're feeling about attractions, they spontaneously mentioning this as a barrier. So there certainly is no doubt that that increased cost of living is going to be holding back many from visiting attractions this summer and autumn. And if we look down here as well, we can see that it's, again, there is something age related, but it's not quite the same as it is among the total population. I'll come back to that in a second. Just to run through a couple of comments over here, why people are saying about rising cost of living. Just people saying, I simply can't afford it. I can barely afford my own bills and food for my family, so it's totally out of the question. I should stick to attractions close to me because petrol is very expensive. I will not be doing this as prices are hiking up all the time from gas, electric, broadband, etc. Little treats are well out the window, and it's not likely to happen. Money is so tight. I'll be lucky to get away for a short break later this month, and I'll talk about holiday taking later on, actually, because that's quite interesting as well. So I mentioned over here that there is an age relation, again, to the spontaneous mentions about rising cost of living. It's slightly different among the attractions market to the population overall. So among attraction visitors, it's perhaps the 35 to 54s who are most affected rather than the oldest. And I think the reason for that is we need to remember that many older people simply aren't in that attractions visiting audience that we saw in the previous slide, because there are lots of age-related barriers to visiting attractions who simply won't be mentioning anything here at all. So they were just not in the market. And those are perhaps the ones that are suffering most financially. Those who are in those aged over 55 who are in the attractions visiting market are perhaps less affected. So it's really, I think, this working population in midlife that have the most financial commitments, but who are also still most active, who are perhaps most likely to be cutting back on visiting attractions over the next few months. So I think with this group, it's easy to say, I'm fed up with my Netflix now. They may want to cut back on their Netflix, but is that really likely to be the case in reality when they're maybe paying £7 or £8 a month for their Netflix, whereas going to an attraction could be theoretically significantly more expensive? So the reality is kicking in there, I think, for some. And we can see how this is impacting visitor attractions, with those feeling financially worse off over here, more likely to say that they will visit attractions less often this summer than those who feel financially better off. So if we take a couple of examples, so over here, as I said, we've isolated those who feel better off and asked them how often they're going to visit attractions this year compared with last year, and compared that with that 40% who feel worse off financially. How more or less likely are they to take visits to attractions this year? Taking a couple of examples, so zoos, safari parks, for example, among those who feel better off or the same financially, 11% said they're going to visit less often this year. If we compare that with those who feel worse off financially, that's as high as 20%, so almost double among that group. For theme parks, similar, 14% of those who feel better off or the same say they're going to visit less this year, but it's 21% among those who feel worse off financially. So it's clearly a barrier. That said, even this group over here, those who feel worse off financially, feel they are more likely to visit more often this year. So the greens outweigh the reds this year. So again, gardens, for example, 35% saying they're going to visit more often, and 13% say they're going to visit less often compared with last year, even among those who feel worse off financially. So although it's still a barrier and it's going to be holding visitor numbers back to below pre-pandemic levels, it's still suggesting that compared with 2021, you are likely to have a better year, regardless of what type of attraction you are. So it's better than 2021, but still there are factors holding it back to pre-pandemic levels. However, it's never quite as black and white as that. It's a little bit more nuanced. So we've had a look at free attractions versus paid attractions. So I think free attractions, perhaps self-evidently, are set to benefit over the next few months at the expense of paid attractions, particularly among that 40% of the public who feel worse off. So if we have a look at free attractions here, we ask people how their personal financial situation will affect visits to free attractions over the next few months. So will they visit them more often than usual, visit them the same, or will they visit them less often than usual? And actually for free attractions across the board, of course, as you'd expect, people are saying I'm going to visit them more often than usual. But that increase is strong even among those who are feeling worse off financially. So 47% of those who feel worse off financially said they're going to visit free attractions more often. So that bodes very well for free attractions, even among those who are feeling worse off. It's much less likely to be the case with paid attractions, of course. So if we look at the population as a whole, you've got only 13% of people saying that they're going to visit paid attractions more often in the next few months, versus 28% saying they're going to visit them less. And clearly that's really driven by that 40% who feel worse off. So over half of that group saying that they're going to visit paid attractions less often in the next few months. So free attractions likely to benefit at the expense of paid attractions in the next few months. And what about prospects for membership or seasons passes in the next few months? Well, I think among current holders of memberships and season passes, there is a notable proportion who feel they will use these more than usual over the next few months. So perhaps squeezing as much value as possible out of their memberships. So you've got 18% of memberships or season pass holders who say they're going to use them much more or a little more than usual in the next few months up until the end of October. And that's even the case among those who feel worse off. So then you've got 13% of those who feel worse off saying they're going, who have a membership, who say they're going to use them more often than usual. So this point about everybody trying to squeeze as much as possible out of their current memberships. However, what we would say up here is that this is balanced by the likely drop-off in renewals among that 40% who are feeling worse off. So you, among the population as a whole, you've got 18% saying I'm going to use my membership or season pass less than usual, and that's really driven by those who are feeling worse off. So you've got 31% saying they'll use their membership less often, and the vast majority of those, so 22%, are saying I will use it much less often. And I think by much less often, these people are really meaning I'm considering not renewing my membership or season pass this year. And that's really backed up by the evidence down here. So we asked people how likely they are or are they more or less likely to renew in the next few months than they would ordinarily be. And if we look at those who are feeling worse off, you've got 16% here who are saying I am less likely to renew my membership or season pass, compared with only 3% who said more likely. So that's, I think, really driving this drop in usage among current members. So I think overall it's a fairly neutral effect for membership this year. You've got some who are going to squeeze more out of it, but there is this danger of using less, and in particular, as we see down here, those who are feeling worse off considering whether they're going to renew or not. And we've also looked at membership from the point of view of acquisition as well as renewal. So I think acquiring new members and season pass holders is also likely to be a challenge in the coming months, again, particularly among that 40% who feel worse off. So we asked people again about how they think their financial situation will affect whether they buy new memberships or season passes in the next few months, again before the end of October. More likely to be, 16% are less likely to buy, compared with 7% who are more likely to buy. And that's again driven by those who are feeling worse off. So among those, that 40% number who are feeling worse off, 28% of those said they are less likely to buy a new membership or season pass this year. So that's what's really driving it. What intrigued me a bit was actually, even among those who feel better off, they are no more likely to buy a new membership or season pass. So 10% said they are more likely to buy. Actually, 10% of that group said they are less likely to buy. So that's fairly neutral, which I thought was quite surprising. So I thought, well, why isn't that higher? And I think the reason for that is related to this last point. I mentioned earlier that we're going to talk about holidays. So I think simply people are less likely to be around in the country, and they're perhaps questioning the value of acquiring a new membership or season pass this year. So at the same time, what we are seeing very clearly here is the return of longer overseas holidays of 5 or more nights. And that's likely to limit the opportunities for visiting UK attractions this summer and autumn. And there's clearly been lots of anecdotal surveys and news pieces in the media recently about high booking levels and demand for overseas trips. And I think that's really evident from this research that really corroborates that. So what we've done is we asked people to tell us what they did last year in terms of overseas holidays, whether it was a short break, whether it was a longer holiday, and when they went. And also asked them this year, have they already taken, have they booked, or do they definitely intend to take an overseas holiday in 2022? And we've compared those here. So the dark is this year, the light blue is last year. So we can see a big jump in overseas holiday taking. So 46% of the population overall say that they've already taken, or they've booked, or they definitely intend to take an overseas holiday this year, compared with only 29% last year. And this is really driven by the longer holidays. So 35% this year, 18% last year. It's pretty similar in terms of overseas short break. So it's really that 2 weeks in the sun again that I think people are craving again this year. And we're likely to see that throughout both the summer. We've seen it already in spring. We're likely to see it again in the summer, and also that extends into the autumn as well, so September, October time. We break that down in a little bit more detail. So we've looked at both short breaks and longer holidays within each time period. And you can see here that it is those longer holidays, whether it's in spring, whether it's in summer, or whether it's in autumn, that are really driving that difference this year. In terms of short breaks, it's pretty much the same as last year. So again, whether it's spring, summer, or autumn, that's fairly similar in terms of overseas holidays. It's really that longer overseas holiday. So it appears that we're really not prepared to sacrifice our overseas holidays, even if we are feeling worse off, because actually, I haven't shown it on here, but I had a look at those who are, that 40% who are feeling worse off, and their increase in propensity to take a longer overseas holiday in the next few months, that propensity to take that holiday has grown at an even higher rate than overall. So overall, it's gone up from 18 to 35. Among those who are feeling worse off, it's gone up from 12% to 28%. So more than doubling, way more than doubling. So the priority, even for those that are feeling worse off, is to get their 2 weeks in the sun at some point this summer and autumn. So do domestic trips get sacrificed this year as a result? And I think the answer is, from the summer onwards, for some, it appears that domestic short breaks may be the trips that are most likely to be sacrificed for these longer overseas holidays. So the easiest way is to look at the detail here. Overall, domestic holidays seem to be at similar sorts of levels to last year in terms of intention to take or taken already, particularly for longer holidays. So whether it's again in spring or summer or autumn, the proportion of people saying they will take a holiday in that time is similar to last year. It's the short breaks that may suffer a little bit. So again, whether it's July and August in the summer, last year, for example, in July and August, 18% took a short break, domestic short break. This year, it's only likely to be 15%. September and October, similarly, 14% this year versus 11% last year. And that may well extend into winter as well. So November, December, 12% last year, only 8% this year. So it's not the longer holidays. They seem to be fairly similar, slightly less perhaps domestic tourist audience this year. So yeah, overall, I think we're likely, because of that decline in short domestic short breaks, we're likely to see perhaps slightly less of a domestic tourist market around this year. I'd say the caveat to all of this, of course, is that there's considerable travel chaos at airports at the moment. Now, at the beginning of June, that was beginning to be mentioned, and it was around during field work, definitely. It doesn't appear to be impacting bookings that much at the moment. Certainly, we didn't have many comments, if any comments really, around travel chaos at airports this year. But I think it's a position to be watched. That clearly may change as people start to suffer the personal consequences of that travel chaos. So that's about it. Just to run through key takeouts of that again. I'll summarize what I've been through. So first key takeout is the sector is set for improved domestic visitor admissions this year, certainly, with over a third of attraction audiences claiming that they will visit more often than in 2021, compared with less than 15% who feel that they will visit less often. So it bodes well this year for an increase compared with last year. And that's really driven by this prevailing sense of happiness and relief among the public to return to normality. So I've just picked out a quote here. I'm feeling excited to visit attractions again. My children have missed out, and my youngest cannot even remember going to them. However, there are these lingering concerns around COVID relating to crowds and feeling that the virus is still circulating, and that's continuing to hold some audiences back from visiting, particularly older audiences. But clearly, as we've seen, the rising cost of living has emerged as a significant barrier to visiting attractions this summer and autumn. So 40% of the public feel worse off than last year, and this large group is much more likely than the rest of the public to say that they will visit attractions less often this year. So again, pulling this quote out, I simply cannot afford it. I can barely afford my bills and food for my family, so it's totally out of the question. So that's, again, along with that lingering COVID effect, the reason why lots of attractions aren't seeing the return to pre-pandemic levels at the moment. However, free attractions are set to benefit at the expense of paid attractions, and half of this financially squeezed group, that 40%, feel that they will visit attractions more often and paid attractions less often this summer and autumn. However, whilst there's this proportion of attractions members that will squeeze as much value as possible, this is likely to be tempered by that lower renewal and acquisition rates among those feeling worse off. And then finally, the point about holidays, the return of longer holidays is also likely to limit opportunities for visiting UK attractions this summer and autumn, with domestic short breaks being the trips most likely to be sacrificed. So 35% of the public have either taken or definitely intend to take an overseas holiday of 5+ nights in 2022, compared with just 18% in 2021. Great, that's it. So thank you very much for listening. If you've got any questions, please feel free to get in touch, either directly or through ALVA. Yeah, please get in touch. Hope you found that useful, and thank you very much for listening.